Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the earth of the world, from the everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn men back to dust, saying, "Return to dust, O sons of men, for 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. You sweep men away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning, though in the morning it springs up new, by evening it is dry and withered. We are consumed by your anger and terrified by your indignation. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. All our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. The length of our days is 70 years, or 80 if we have the strength. Yet our span is but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. Who knows the power of your anger? For your wrath is as great as the fear that is due you. Teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Relent, O Lord, how long can it be? Have compassion on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love, that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, for as many years as we have seen trouble. May your deeds be shown to your servants, your splendor to their children. May the favor of the Lord our God rest upon us. Establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands.
Really is good to be back with you. I haven't been in the pulpit in a month, and I think I forgot how to do this, so just bear with me for a little bit, and we'll get to this. This is a long psalm, and there's a lot to it, and I'm probably not going to get to every little piece of it. It's kind of hard to do. Some of these, as I find, as I study God's Word, there's so much in each verse. It's packed. You could do a sermon on each one. But we would be here forever. So sort of do an overview of this. But I was very blessed by being in this psalm, this particular psalm, as I think about the terrible things that are happening in our country this week and the shootings. It seems to be getting commonplace. We're kind of numb to it. We're like, well, another one happened. But it's really a terrible state of affairs. And I think we need this psalm to remember these things by. Mark Twain, famous writer, said this about life. A myriad of men are born. They labor and sweat and struggle. They squabble and scold and fight. They scramble for little mean advantages over each other. Age creeps upon them. Infirmities follow. Those they love are taken from them, and the joy of life is turned to aching grief. The release, comes at last. The only unpoisoned gift earth ever had for them, and they vanish from a world where they were of no consequence, a world which will lament them a day and forget them forever. I'm really encouraged by that. I hope you are too. What happens when you realize, and usually we realize it sooner or later, that your dreams are not going to come true? That thing you were looking for to sort of fill the longing wasn't going to happen. Or what happens when you actually do realize your dreams and you realize that didn't fulfill the longing either? What do you do with that? I guess my question for us this morning is, are you satisfied with your life? Are you happy with where you are? Are you satisfied with the way things have gone for you? The author of this psalm is Moses, and he's in a dark place. It's near the end of his life. His sister Miriam has just died. Though she had her rebellious moments, she was his right hand. His brother Aaron has just died. He's the high priest. And he's been with Moses all along, ever since the children of Israel came out of Egypt. He had his rough moments as well, but he's the high priest of God, representing the people before God. And now he is dead. And Moses himself is facing his death. He had sinned against God, and God had told him he wouldn't be entering into the promised land, the thing he'd been pushing for 40 years. They came out of Egypt in this glorious array. They were on their way to the promised land, but the Israelites complained and complained and complained and rebelled and rebelled and rebelled. And when they got to the edge of the promised land, they rebelled. They were afraid. They didn't want to go in. And God said, none of you adults are going to go in. And so they wandered for 40 years, and Moses had to lead them. And finally one day he'd had enough at the waters of Meribah. And he disobeyed God, what God told him to do. And God said, you're not going to see the promised land, the thing he was pushing for all those years. Death and dying are surrounding him. The purpose of his life, his dream to get into the promised land, is lying in shambles. And so what does Moses do? He writes this psalm. Lord, you've been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Moses needs this reminder. How about you? Do you need this reminder about who God is? I think we need a dose of what this psalm is giving us. I think the rest of the psalm is his trying to make it real, trying to make it true, what the first two verses say. Then he begins to plead with God. So I want to look at two things in this psalm. And there are these two things: the condition of the human race. And I've got some kind of boominess going on here. Does anybody else have that? Maybe it's just me up here, but I'm feeling a lot of feedback or something. Okay, that's a little better. So number one, the condition of the human race, and number two, the grace of God. So let's look first at the condition of the human race. People are looking for the it factor. IT, capital, it. They want it. What's it? Well, it is hard to define sometimes. Here's my stab at defining what it is. We might call it satisfaction. That I'm satisfied in the depths of my soul. We might call it deep rest for the soul. The soul at rest, at peace, full orb peace. My life is okay. I'm okay. We might call it freedom from fear or worry or anxiety. We might even call it that fulfillment of a deep longing. We're longing for things and it never seems to come. It never seems to come, that it that we're looking for all the time. Everyone seems to be searching for it, but they can't find it. The it factor. When you're young, you convince yourself that you can find it in the things that you're going to do. You have dreams, you have hopes, you have aspirations. I've listed here 4 things, 4 places where people look for it. Number 1, a relationship with a significant other. All of our music, it's not all of our music, but most of our music is about this. Our movies are about this. A movie's not a good movie if it doesn't have some kind of a romantic relationship in it. We're always talking about these things. We dream about these things. A significant other is like an important part of dreaming when you're young, because that other person will fulfill that it factor, that longing. They'll give you what you long for. Number 2, success in work, especially monetary success, financial success. If we make enough money, if we're successful enough, we will fulfill the deepest longings of our hearts. If we have money, we have power, and if we have power, we can do whatever we want. We can write our own ticket. We can fulfill any whim, anything that we would like to do. Surely you can fulfill any longing with money, can't you? Number 3, maybe to be well known, to be significant, to be important, to be in demand, to have an important reputation, for people to know us, to respect us, that when we walk into a room, everybody's looking at us. This is something so many of us desire. So we look for it in our reputation. Sometimes we look for it in the absence of something, the absence of pain or affliction. If we could just get rid of this pain and this affliction, our souls will be fulfilled. But it's this pain and this difficulty and this hardship that I'm going through now that keeps me from it, from having it deep in my soul. Well, those are some of the ways. There's many ways that we seek out it in our lives to fulfill the longings. But the truth is that as you begin to get older, you begin to realize that those longings are still there. They're just still there. That if you accomplished all of your hopes and dreams, you still didn't fulfill that deepest longing. There's a hole in my soul. Our search for it is so powerful in our lives. So many people have written about their dissatisfaction with life. You might even call it the meaninglessness of life. Well, there's a whole book in the Bible about that, the book of Ecclesiastes. He searched for it in everything, and it was all meaningless to him. Well, there's so many people that have written about this. Here's a little quote from Macbeth, Shakespeare's Macbeth. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. That's quite a description of life, isn't it? Peggy Lee, I don't know if you've heard that. If you're younger than I am, then no, you haven't. But she was a popular American singer. She sang popular songs. She sang jazz. In 1969, she came out with a song entitled, "Is That All There Is?" And in the song, you can look it up on YouTube, in the song she actually talks through the verses, and then she sings the chorus, and she begins to recite different things, and the chorus comes back to this: is that all there is? Is that all there is? If that's all there is, my friends, then let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze and have a ball, if that's all there is. So I don't have the time to read all of it, but let me read the end of it for you. She says, "Then I fell in love, head over heels in love, with the most wonderful boy in the world. We would take long walks by the river or just sit for hours gazing into each other's eyes. We were so very much in love. Then one day he went away and I thought I'd die, but I didn't. And when I didn't, I said to myself, is that all there is to love? Is that all there is? Is that all there is? If that's all there is, my friends, then let's keep dancing. I know you must be saying to yourselves, if that's the way she feels about it, why doesn't she just end it all? Oh, no, not me. I'm in no hurry for that final disappointment. For I know just as well as I'm standing here talking to you, when that final moment comes and I'm breathing my last breath, I'll be saying to myself, is that all there is? Is that all there is? If that's all there is, my friends, then let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze and have a ball, if that's all there is. Isn't that what we come to sometimes in life? Is that it? Is that all? Or how about this interview with Brad Pitt? Rolling Stone magazine interviewed him about his starring in the movie Fight Club, about his leading role in Fight Club. And this is Brad Pitt talking. He says, "Man, I know all these things are supposed to seem important to us. The car, the condo, our version of success. But if that's the case, why is the general feeling out there reflecting more impotence and isolation and desperation and loneliness? If you ask me, I say toss all this. We got to find something else. Because all I know is that at this point in time, we're heading for a dead end, a numbing of the soul, a complete atrophy of the spiritual being. And I don't want that." Then the interviewer asked him, "So if we're heading toward this kind of existential dead end in society, what do you think should happen?" And Pitt says, "Hey man, I don't have those answers yet. The emphasis now is on success and personal gain." And he smiles. "I'm sitting in it, and I'm telling you that's not it. I'm the guy who's got everything, I know. But I'm telling you, once you've got everything, then you're just left with yourself. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It doesn't help you sleep any better, and you don't wake up any better because of it." This is what Moses is telling us in this psalm. In verse 3 says, "You return man to dust and say, 'Return, O children of man, for 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night. You sweep them away as with a flood. They're like a dream, like grass that is renewed in the morning. In the morning it flourishes and is renewed. In the evening it fades and withers.'" Your life just passes from the stage. He uses these three metaphors. He says 1,000 years are like a day. It's like, I'm going to be 59 years old, and it seems like yesterday I was in high school. It really does. 1,000 years is like a day. Then he uses the metaphor of a flood. And you know what? You remember the tsunami in Asia? 1 minute they're all on the beach having a good time. The next minute it's gone. It's all gone. There's nothing left. It just wiped everything out. And then he equates it with a flower, with a grass, a blade of grass that's there in the morning and it's gone at night. It's just so transient. Our lives are so transient. We're forgotten so easily. You may be able to name your great-grandparents, but can you name your great-great-grandparents? Do you know their names? You see how easily it's forgotten? Your great-great-grandchildren will not know who you were. They won't know you. Life just vanishes. It's so fast. It's just a breath. And on the surface of it, our lives just seem completely meaningless. It's so fast. But Moses isn't just struggling with the brevity of life and how fast things go. He's also standing there at the end of his life, contemplating his own sinfulness, what he contributed to the situation in which he finds himself. He's not going to get to go into the promised land. He is going to die and will be remembered no more. Nobody knows where his body is buried. He says in verse 7, "For we are brought to an end by your anger, by your wrath we are dismayed. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence." I think the key right here is that phrase, secret sins. What he's trying to describe here is what this looks like in terms of our sin. It's not only that we have brevity of life, and of course that came because of the fall of man. Because Adam and Eve fell, the curse came, and we die. We have physical death. Every one of us will face physical death. That's a part of the curse. But he goes way deeper than that when he begins to talk about secret sins. He's saying that it isn't as much about behavior as it is about the attitude of the heart, what I was talking about earlier. And what attitude is that? It's essentially that we don't need God. We just don't need him. We're seeking it. It's the it that we're trying to fill. We're filling the hole in our soul, the longing. We're searching to fill it. Thank you, God, but I got it. I'm going to find it over here or over here or over here. We get excited about all kinds of things, but the excitement always fades. It always fades until the next thing, until we can get there. And he says as much in verse 11. Who considers the power of your anger and your wrath according to the fear of you? People just simply don't consider God. He's not in the equation at all. And yet, people live, in the words of Henry David Thoreau, lives of quiet desperation. Haven't found it. In Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis comments on this. He says this: most people, if they had really learned to look into their own hearts, would know that they do want, and want acutely, something that cannot be had in this world. There are all sorts of things in this world that offer to give it to you, but they never quite kept their promise. The longings which arise in us when we first fall in love, or first think of some foreign country, or first take up some subject that excites us, are longings which no marriage, no travel, no learning can really satisfy. I am not now speaking of what would be ordinarily called unsuccessful marriages or holidays or learned careers. I'm speaking of the best possible ones. There was something we grasped at in that first moment of longing which just fades away in the reality. I think everyone knows what I mean. The wife may be a good wife, and the hotels and scenery may have been excellent, and chemistry may be a very interesting job, but something has evaded us. Moses is struggling when he writes in verse 9, "For all our days pass away under your wrath. We bring our years to an end like a sigh. The years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength 80, yet their span is but toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away." He knows how fleeting life is, and he's feeling the weight of his sin. He's feeling the weight of his mortality. Where are you looking for it? How are you fulfilling that longing? Have you found it? Number 2 is the grace of God. C.S. Lewis again responds to the dilemma of desire, again in Mere Christianity. Creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger, well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim, well, there's such a thing as water. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. In another place, he says this: how could an idiotic universe produce creatures whose mere dreams are so much stronger and better and subtler than himself? You understand what he's saying? How can, if you just believe in matter and evolution and things just fell together, how could that produce a creature that has all these aspirations and dreams and longings deep in their soul? How could he create something so much bigger than itself? He says, do fish complain of the sea for being wet? Or if they did, would that fact itself not strongly suggest that they had not always been or would not always be purely aquatic creatures? And if you were really the product of a materialistic universe, how is it that you don't feel at home here? See, Moses knows what Thoreau did not know, what Mark Twain missed, what Macbeth didn't know, what Peggy Lee didn't get, and what Brad Pitt refuses to acknowledge, though I understand he grew up in the church, and what eludes so many of us in our society. This is it. Moses knows God. Moses knows God. And so he tells us in verse 12, so teach us. He's crying out to God. He has laid out the devastation. He has laid out the sin, the curse. He has laid out the shortness of life, the brevity of life, the seeming meaninglessness of life. And then he cries in verse 12, so teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom. Return, O Lord. It's a play on words with verse 3 that he says, we return to the dust. And here he says, return, O Lord, to us. Return, O Lord, how long? Have pity on your servants. Give us a heart of wisdom. How do we get a heart of wisdom? Augustine, the great theologian, said that you become what you become, not so much because of what you believe, or what you think, or even what you do. These are not the things that make you what you are. He says you become what you become because of what you love. And the priority of your loves. What is at the top? What is the thing that you love the most, for which you would be willing to give your life? That is what you become. So the question for us is, what is it that we love the most? See, I think Moses had no doubt about where to get it. He wasn't going to go into the promised land. He knew that. But he knew also who had the power and the control of his life. And he's crying out to him. He knows where to satisfy the deep longing. And he says it in verse 14, satisfy. He's crying out to God, satisfy in us in the morning with your steadfast love, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. How do we get satisfaction? Remember the 4 things that I gave us at the beginning? Will we find satisfaction in finding a significant other? No, we've seen that go off the rails. The sexual revolution has completely redefined what it means to have a significant other. There's a complete redefinition of everything. And yet we're no closer to satisfaction. There's more broken relationships than ever. And relational anxiety is through the roof. It's not working. Put such an emphasis on finding someone. It's not working. The myth of greener pastures, that somebody else will fulfill me more than the one I have, it's just a myth. It's always a myth. How about if we were successful? Brothers and sisters, we live like kings. You only need to travel overseas, even in developed parts of the world. Nobody lives like we do. Nobody does. We live like kings, especially compared to most of the world. And yet our suicide rate is climbing. I don't think that's working for us. I don't think we're finding it in our success. We've worked to protect our reputations. It's important to us what people think about us. We have worked hard and we're exhausted. We're exhausted hiding some of ourselves from people. We don't want them to know the real us because we know deep down inside we're broken, that there are broken things, and we can't expose that to anybody. We can't let anybody see that our family fights. We can't let anybody see that we fight with our spouse. We can't let anybody see anything. We need to put a great front forward so that everybody thinks everything is going peachy keen and hunky-dory. We're exhausted trying to keep up a reputation. I don't think that's working for us. I don't think we found it. And we've avoided pain and suffering at all cost. If we believe what verse 15 says, which is, make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, and for as many years as we have seen evil, we realize that though we've worked hard to avoid suffering, it hasn't brought us any closer to fulfilling our longing, the longing in our hearts. In fact, what the psalmist is saying is exactly the opposite. It's not in avoiding suffering that we come into understanding what real satisfaction is. It's actually through suffering. It's actually because of suffering. So instead of trying to avoid it and run away from it, we should embrace it. But who wants to do that? We've tried to avoid it. So, where do we get satisfaction? Well, he says, satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love. Moses knows that we will never be satisfied until we are overwhelmed with the steadfast love of God. The steadfast love of God. It's the bottom line. I find these verses in Hebrews so intriguing to me. They're an enigma. All that chapter on faith is such an enigma because it talks about Old Testament characters in a way that we're like, that's not the Old Testament character that I read in the Old Testament. What are they saying about him here in the New Testament? That's weird. But listen to these verses about Moses. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ, and it names Christ here. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. What is it that Moses knows? He knows that there's something so much bigger. He was not looking for an easy life. He was okay with the reproach. He was okay with the complaining, because how did he deal with it? He went to his God. He went to his God, and he spoke to God as a friend speaks to another friend face to face. He was not looking for an easy life, but he knew a Redeemer would come and would set things right, and that the future was bright for him. Do we doubt the steadfast love of God? We'll know it by what's at the top of our loves list. But we need to look no further than Jesus Christ. We may not like the way God runs the world. We may not like the way God's running our lives. We may not like the way God is making the way that our lives have gone. We may not like the things that we're involved in now. We may not like to where we've come in our lives. Feeling like a failure, not having achieved it, still not feeling the satisfaction or the solution of the deep longing that we have. We may not like any of those things. But one thing we cannot do is doubt his steadfast love, because he sent his only son for us. Now that's a God who loves. The one who's willing to give up his only son for the sake of his people. That's not a God who is oblivious to suffering. That's not a God who's oblivious to anything. He's here with us. We cannot doubt his love. Jesus was crushed so that we would not have to be. Jesus did not risk his life. He came and gave his life. He came with a purpose of suffering and dying. By his wounds, we are healed. That's true love. Clearly, there's nothing in this world that'll satisfy our longings. Do you have longings? Good, you're human. Run to Jesus. It's the only place. Augustine said our souls are restless until they find their rest in thee. Would you be willing to stop being such a hard charger and just simply lean into Jesus and let him be in charge? Let him shape what you love? It's a way better path, and it's really the only path. Lord, you have been our dwelling.